Hello, my name is Travis Gross. I'm the Executive Director here at the Sheboygan County Historical Society, and I'd like to welcome you to this installment of our Heritage Series, where we are going to take a look at the Volga German population of Sheboygan County. So today you will get to experience several stations of Volga German descendants who will be speaking on their family heritage, who will be speaking on just the heritage of the Volga German culture that made their long journey from Germany to the Volga region of Russia and finally here to Sheboygan County. We will also have some food traditional to the Volga Germans available. We are going to have the Schuhplattlers dancing group to entertain, as well as the Concordia singers will be entertaining our visitors today as well. We'll also have a couple of presentations on the story of the Volga Germans, as well as a book that was written by a local researcher of the Volga German heritage. So sit back, enjoy the show, and we hope you learn a little bit something about the Volga Germans of Sheboygan County. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ken Thompson. This is my wife Janine. We are members of the Wurdenfelser Schuhplattler Club in Sheboygan. Our club was founded in 1934 by Otto Schuster and Tony Ryder. That's 85 years ago. And we're going strong today. We have a very strong children's group. We do a lot of performances. We travel around. In our early years, we traveled. We took second place in Canada, Montreal. We took first place in Detroit. We took second place in Los Angeles. But we were quite a competitive group. We meet at the Bavarian Hall in Sheboygan, and I am the dance instructor for over 30 years. And this is my wife. She's president of the club, and we retain our German heritage, our Bavarian tradition. Would you like to say something, honey?
Well, the dance that we do is called the Schuhplattler. It's from Bavaria, southern Germany. It is supposed to be imitating the animals and the things that the farmers and hunters saw in the woods when they were out working, and then brought back for their entertainment with the rest of the family.
As a family, we had our children dance in the club. We traveled quite a bit, and I want to thank the Sheboygan Historical Society here for having us perform here today, and for our German heritage.
Good morning. My name is Ted Baumgartner. I am president of the Gesangverein Concordia, the Concordia German Singing Society of Sheboygan. We have been singing many German songs. We sing English as well, but mostly we sing the German songs from the hinterlands, the small towns. We were formed, this organization was formed in February of 1860. There's a picture of the original 13 members of our organization. They came here in February of 1860 as German immigrants looking for a new home. They arrived in Sheboygan and immediately began to put together this organization because they were interested in maintaining their German culture through song. We have been an active group ever since, and this year we are celebrating our 159th birthday. I believe we even have some of the original members. I'm just kidding. We do have our own building that we rehearse every Tuesday evening, 7 o'clock. We're always looking for new members, and if you have an interest, please look us up. We're on Facebook. We have about 28 to 30 active members. We have many passive members who support us simply because they are interested in keeping the German culture alive. We are also available for many different locations of singing. We sing in nursing homes, we've sung at the Weil Center, we sing in Milwaukee, and so we're anxious to enjoy music with anybody that's interested in the German culture.
Hi, my name is David Markgraf, and my passion is genealogy, trying to find out more about my family, who I didn't really know because my father died when I was 2 years old. And I made it my passion to try to find out where he came from and what he did and about his family back in Russia. Our family were originally from Germany, and they migrated to Russia and lived there for approximately 150 years. And so I was able to track my family back to 1730, which is probably about 800 people in our family tree. I belong to an organization called AHSGR, or American Historical Society of Germans from Russia. And through the use of their library and their help, I was able to track my family in Russia and when they came to the United States and where they lived. I'm currently a vice president of the local chapter here in Sheboygan, and we have numerous meetings during the year and programs such as this, which enables the Volga Germans to learn more about their families. We have library materials that are available to our members. If you're interested in becoming a member, please give us a contact, and we'll be happy to get a hold of you and tell you how it's done. Part of what I did was to write a book about my family. It took me approximately 10 years to be able to put this thing together, and it's kind of a lifelong dream of mine that I was able to do it. In addition to our library, we also have a significant collection of biographies of Germans from Russia that one of our members put together. It primarily from the Sheboygan area, where a lot of Volga German Russians lived. The centers for their migration were Wisconsin, Minnesota, California, Nebraska, Michigan, and many of them were farmers in Russia, and when they came here to the United States, they also tried to be farmers. Many of them couldn't find a farm because the land was not available, so they ended up working in factories like Kohler in Kohler, Wisconsin. They did follow the beet industry, though. When the beets were ripe in Michigan, they would get on a truck and head for Michigan and spend the summer picking beets and weeding beets. They made good money doing that, and the whole family would go along, from the adults to the little children. Today we're at the Sheboygan Museum, and we are offering some of our typical German-Russian food, Fleischbruch and Kuchen, and I wish you were here with us.
Hello, my name is Carolyn Engelman Keither. My father was born in Dietl, Russia, and I am here today to display some of the artifacts and collection I have of finding out about my ancestors. I included some of the foods that they produced in their gardens and some of the baked goods and things that they made by themselves. I have found that most people today, especially young people, are not interested in knowing about our heritage. But sometimes I feel that if we make videos or we have displays like this, someone might carry on our heritage. I have spent quite a few years collecting the materials I do have, and some of the people who gave me so much information have since passed. We are an older generation, and it is hard to find people, young people, so I encourage everybody to find someone and bring them to our meetings in Sheboygan the second Saturday of the month at Trinity Lutheran, the Annex, which is kitty corner from the church. My father came with his family in 1912. With him also came the Schmidt family, which was my grandmother's maiden name. So between the two families, they spent quite a journey on the boat, and they had paid good money to come in gold. And what happened was they were placed down in the hold. All these people were just crammed together, but many of them were so tough they survived the journey, and they came to places like Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and then from there migrated other places to live. And my father migrated to Sheboygan when he was old enough. He was quite a traveler, but he said the best place he loved was, I believe, Colorado. He said it was so beautiful and a wonderful place to be.
Hello, my name is Emma Theme. My maiden name was Herman, and I belong to the Sheboygan Historical Society of Germans from Russia, the Sheboygan chapter. I also belong to the national headquartered in Lincoln, Nebraska, and our charter was started many years ago, and then for a while it dropped off, but now we restarted it again about a year or two ago. And we came up with a lot of interesting things that we thought other people would enjoy learning about. So today is the day that it's called Volga German Day in Sheboygan. And we have a display here. I brought along some artifacts, and so did Anne. And I have a binder in which I have a lot of pictures. My family was, first of all, I have to tell you a little bit about my history. My father's first wife passed away, and after a while he married my mother, and they were going to come to America in 1912. They got as far as Moscow, and one of the children contracted chicken pox or something, and so they couldn't bleed for at least a month, and two of the other children had eye problems, and America wouldn't accept them when they have eye problems. So the decision was made that my father would come ahead, and as soon as the eye problems were solved, the rest would follow. And that didn't happen because of World War I came along, and then there was the Russian Revolution of 1917, which my mother and two sisters, or my two sisters after a while, were left enduring, and then there was a famine after that. And finally, in 1923, 11 years later, they were able to come. But while they were there, after my father was here for a short time, he really missed his family, and he wanted a picture of them. So he told them, go and have a picture made, and this is the picture. And he said, and let the photographer leave a hole in the middle. And when the picture came here, he took it to Keither's studio in town, and they set him right in the middle of the picture. We always thought that was kind of a neat thing. They even did those kind of things years ago. And then a year later, about a year later, my twin brother and I were born, and then I have a younger brother. And now I am the sole survivor of our family. Anne and I brought along some artifacts from those days. Anne brought along a beautiful blouse that belonged to her grandmother. It is very, very fragile, but it was handmade, the whole thing. It's just gorgeous. It's hanging right there behind. And then that display case over here at the glass is where I have some of my mother's things. There's a two-piece dress, a top and a skirt, that she wore that was over 100 years ago, and it was still good enough condition that I ironed it the other day before I brought it here. There's also a scarf that was hand crocheted by my half-sister Sophie. She's also the one that was the one that I got a lot of information from about the early days. She grew up from a youngster all the way until she was 18, as she learned everything that was done in the village. So we wrote a little book about that called Bits and Pieces. And along with the dress, there's also, under the glass, there's a big shawl. It's 32 inches square with 5-inch fringe all around. And the shawl was formed into a triangle, in two actually, a larger and a smaller triangle. It was wrapped around the shoulder, and then if it was a cold day, they took the shorter triangle and threw it over their shoulder. That kept their ears from freezing, because the winters were bitter cold in Russia, of course. There's also a hymnal in there that was printed in 1900, and I was surprised when it says that it was the 19th edition. And it was a hymnal that was made especially for the German people who lived along the Volga, the German Lutheran people. And my mother said that inside there's some beautiful coloring artwork that one of the boys had had written or done. There's also a wooden spoon there. It's decorated, but of course the Russian people didn't have anything to eat like that looked like that. When they ate, they had a plain wooden spoon, and it tasted. My father always said it tasted better than eating out of a metal spoon. And so I vaguely remember getting a package from Russia back when I was a little girl, and there were wooden spoons in it, and I think they maybe requested that they send him a few wooden spoons that he could pass out to some of his friends. When my husband and I were on a trip down the Volga River in 1989, and so I picked up one of those colorful wooden spoons, and it's in that case. What else is in there? Oh, there's a scarf, a head scarf that my sister crocheted that's hanging on there too. And then there's a half apron up here that's also hand crocheted. My sister was very good at doing crochet work. One time an aunt of hers asked her to make her a red skirt, and she said that color was awfully hard on my eyes. Later in life she had eye problems. She always blamed it onto that. What else can I talk about? Oh, when we were over to Russia, we took this cruise down the down the Volga River, just a short distance. I brought along some water from the Volga River, and a couple of years ago, a friend of my son's went on a trip like that, and she brought along another bottle. This was from 1918, and this was from 1989. So.
Good afternoon. I'm Jim Moore, and I'm the president of the Greater Sheboygan chapter of American Historical Society of Germans from Russia. And we're putting on a display at the museum this afternoon. And I'd like to thank the museum for asking us to be here. And what we have behind me is a display we put together, a timeline of how the Germans ended up in Russia. And it starts with the manifesto that was issued by Catherine the Great when she became the Emperor of Russia, and invited German people to come and settle in into Russia. And at that time, Germany actually was not a country. Germany was a bunch of different German-speaking states, and they all seemed to be at war with one another. And one war had just ended, and people were sick of the wars and took the opportunity to go to Germany. They hired concessionaires who got a commission for each and every person they could get to agree to come to Germany. And they signed up over 27,000 people to come to Russia and settle. So, like I said, the concessionaires worked on a commission for every person they could hire or get to sign on, and they could promise them anything. One of the big things in the manifesto that attracted the people to come was, first one here was that they would have freedom of religion, but there were some conditions to that. They couldn't convert anybody else to their religion except for those of Mohammedan faith, it said in the manifesto. And for whatever reason, the one other thing in the manifesto was they did not want any Jews. So none of the German Jews went to Russia. But in all, 27,000 people signed up, and to get from Russia into Germany took almost a year. And 27,000 people went, and 23,000 people arrived to set up the first colonies. The ones that died were, of course, the oldest people and the youngest ones. When they got to Russia, first of all, they got to Saratov, which was the biggest village in the area. and they gave them some supplies and wagons, and then marched them out. They had to walk all the way to wherever their villages were. Sometimes it took them 2 or 3 days to get there. And when they got there, the commander said, "Halt," and said, "Unload the wagons, you're at the place." And they were out in the middle of nowhere. The Russians had promised that they were going to have housing available for them and supplies to build the housing. When they got there, they had nothing. And he told them, "Here you are." Well, they said, "Where's our housing?" He said, "Well, that's coming soon." That became a kind of a standing joke with the Germans that soon they would have something. And they set up their villages, and for the first 10 years when they were in Russia, the Russians didn't get them seed in time in order for them to have a crop, because the land where they were in, the Russians didn't even know whether it was suitable for farming, and it got a total of 14.6 inches of rain per year. So they had to get the seed in the ground in the spring before the land dried up so that the crop could grow. And after 10 years, they finally had a good crop, and then with the one good crop, they didn't have to depend on the Russians to get the seed, and they got the seed in time, and they started growing a surplus. And eventually, the German villages there became the breadbasket for Russia. They supplied most of Russia, plus the Baltic countries and Finland with wheat. And this went on for years. They had all kinds of problems with storms, but they were smart enough to know that some years they would have a crop failure. So they kept the supply on hand. They had a granary in each village, and they had a 2-year supply of grain. So when they ran out of, if they had a bad year, they could draw from the stores in the granary, but then they had to make it up when they had the next good harvest. And they always kept 1/3 for their own use, 1/3 they could sell, and the other 1/3 went into the granary. So there was always a supply in the villages. And for the next 150 years, they had no problem until the Russian Revolution came along. And then they took everything away from the village storehouses because everything belonged to the people. And you couldn't have a store for yourself. 'Cause, once that happened, then a famine came in Russia, and I'll backtrack just a little bit. Before the famine in 1875 or so, one of the promises they had been made was that they would forever not have to join the military unless they wanted to. And the Tsar that was in power in 1875 said, well, forever only meant 100 years, and you guys have been here for 100 years. Now you're going to have to go in the army. And they started drafting some of the Germans into the Russian army, and it was very difficult for them because they had grown up in these colonies and only talked German, and now get into the Russian army and have to take orders from somebody in Russian, which most of them didn't understand. So people started thinking about leaving. Well, some of them still remembered what it was like when they went from Germany to Russia, and this time they were going to be a little more careful, and they sent scouts to the United States to look over the land, and they came back with samples, and many people decided to leave. One in particular is marked up here on the list, is Balthazar Brungart. Took the whole village when they left. There were 1,454 people all en masse left the village and came to the United States. And over the years, many of the German Russians came to the United States. The bulk of them settled in Kansas and Nebraska. Some went on to Colorado, some went up into Washington. The ones that came to Sheboygan were mainly from 5 villages that were right in a line along the Volga River. And many of them knew somebody who was here that sponsored them, like my father-in-law. His family came here, and they had a relative that was here who sent them the money for the tickets so they could come over to the United States. And so they packed up the grandma, my father-in-law's parents, and 3 children, and came to the United States with $25 and tickets to get to Sheboygan once they got off the ship. And they settled here in Sheboygan. My grandfather came here from Urbach, Russia, and settled in Sheboygan. His wife had a brother that was living here in Sheboygan and helped my grandfather get here. My grandfather got a job, and after he had saved up enough money, he sent money back to Russia for his wife and children to come over here. The German Russians have been some very industrious people. They weren't afraid of working. And one thing on this timeline about the colonies mentions that most of the colonies there wasn't even a jail. And in 1911, in the German colonies, there were 5 homicides in total in all of the Volga German colonies, and the population was 583,650 people. And every one of them was from a physical altercation and not the result of a gunshot or stabbing. But 5 of them for 585,000 people in a whole year. Some of our bigger cities around here get more than that in one night.
Our next song is, it was made famous by Bette Midler. You are all familiar with that one too. And it's about the encouragement for people who are so afraid of failing, even in love, that they don't even try. We love to sing the rose, or in German, the translation is die Rose.
Liebe ist, so wie ein Hi, I'm Anna Dahlheimer-Bartkowski. I am a 100% descendant of Germans from Russia, so I'm very excited to be here today to celebrate our Volga German ancestry. What I'm sharing today is basically I've done numerous presentations and books over the years about our history, but I think one of the biggest things that people ask me now is how do I start? Where do I start tracking my genealogy? So what I suggest is this is what I would have told myself 40 years ago. If I was starting my genealogy right now, what I've done is I've created a presentation called Tips and Tricks for Tracking Your German-Russian Ancestors. And it really covers everything from where do I start to where do I end and how do I keep going. It's also currently on my blog at valuemeals.blogspot.com. And there's just tons of information available and tons of resources. On my blog, we're only at this moment on tip number 3. There are 9 tips and there are 2 tricks. And I'll share with you one of the tricks and one of the things that kind of flustered me when I was working through my genealogy. When I got some documentation of my grandfather, Fred Herzog's birth in Russia, it said his birthday was in June. And I knew, being an American, that his birthday was the 4th of July. And it took me a little bit because I was kind of tricked into thinking I had the wrong document. But no. The calendar that we use in the United States is the Gregorian calendar, and it's been in place since Pope Gregory changed the calendars from the Julian calendar. But Russia did not change their calendars until 1916 under Lenin's regime. So there's always going to be a change. Anything document from Russia before 1916 will have a 10 to 15 day difference in any of these documents. So that's just one of the things that you will learn and be prepared for if you're interested in tracking your German from Russia ancestry. There's lots of good information, there's lots of good community out there, and I want to thank the museum for putting on this wonderful event. It's been a great day to meet and talk about genealogy. So please join me on my blog, and note that it says I'm a Grevel lover. I love Grevel, I love food, and there's plenty of books available to help you celebrate your ancestry. Thank you.
Hi, welcome. I'm Peter Kaland. My ancestors were part of the Germans from Russia who immigrated to Sheboygan in 1912. I have some artifacts that were given to me by the Zitzer family. I think one really interesting story is this wedding cane. The tradition was if somebody was getting married, you would come to their house and they would invite you to the wedding. If you agreed to go to the wedding, they tied a ribbon on. Of course, a part of this is you also had to have a schnapps at the same time. I can imagine if you were the uncle and you went to 20 households by the time you were done. But this is a wedding cane. I read in a book, I think the cane is now 100 years old. Now I don't know if the ribbons are also that old, but it is very much a tradition of the German Russians at the time of weddings. Some other displays, items. These boots are from Russia. The belief is that they were military boots. Notice in particular how high they are. They would go up to, certainly up to the knees. The other thing is that by today's standards, people are we're a good deal shorter. My grandson, when he was 12, wore these pants, and I think, as you can tell, they're for a relatively short person. And in addition to that, the very decorative shirts that were also from Russia. a shawl that Grandma Zitzer brought with her from Russia, and I think some other things that were brought in were the spoons. Now, you didn't have all kinds of eating utensils. Probably you had a spoon and that was about it. I would guess that somebody had at least one knife, but you had your spoon. And these were brought to America by the Zitzer family. And then I think the last item is a little dish in which you would put salt and pepper. And remember, when people were cooking, you took a pinch of salt or a pinch of whatever. That's why when you look at the recipes, a lot of times it's either seasoned to taste or a pinch. And you say, well, how much is a pinch? And it seemed like a lot of these German-Russian women never had a cookbook, or you said until it feels right, or until it looks right. And that was the case very often when they were cooking. So these are the examples of some artifacts. Obviously, there wasn't a whole lot that you could take with you to America. Some of these things have survived and are really precious for the various families. It's been a good day in Sheboygan. I hope we re-entered an interest in family history. It's an important part of our heritage, and we're doing everything we can to continue that story.